What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for the 5th annual Arrowverse crossover event titled Elseworlds. So this review will definitely be more about the entire crossover as a whole, not really each episode individually. If you want to see my reviews for each episode individually, links will be in the description as well as in the top right corner of the video for all 3 of those videos. But in this review, although it will probably be a little impossible to avoid talking about each episode individually at times, for the most part, it will be the entire crossover put together. As for the question asked in the title, which is Elseworlds the best crossover in the Arrowverse yet? I have seen some comments saying it isn't, some comments saying it is, some comments saying that they're undecided, but for me, I will throw my opinion into the mix at the end of this video in the conclusion section, where I go over whether or not it's the best crossover yet, as well as give it a score. For now, let's go over the actual review on the 5th annual Arrowverse crossover event, Elseworlds. So, Elseworlds was definitely trying to cram in a lot of things into 3 episodes. Originally, it was conceived and teased as a crossover that features Batwoman and is set in Gotham City. Like a couple weeks later, maybe 2 weeks after that, it was confirmed that this will probably lead up to a Batwoman TV show. Now, at this point, this has been confirmed, and it is already in development. Then, it was confirmed that Superman will be appearing, which is a huge deal considering he's never appeared in a crossover before, and he's never met characters like The Flash and Green Arrow. Then it was confirmed that the title of the crossover is Elseworlds, which, if you don't know, Elseworlds in the comics is, well, nothing to do with what it was in the show, but it is basically multiverse stories that are very varied from the actual main version of the DC Universe. And then it was confirmed that the Monitor will be appearing, which led me to believe that this will lead up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, which it definitely did. Then the poster came out teasing that this body swap, or at least a version of Oliver Queen and a version of Barry Allen, which is The Flash and Green Arrow respectively, will be in the show. Then the trailer came out confirming it was an actual body swap. So a lot of things were crammed into just 3 parts in this crossover, and surprisingly, even though it was so many things that they had to do, most of them, if not all of them, except for one, was done really, really well. So in order, I think that Batwoman and that whole thing with Gotham City, for the most part, was great in that second part. Although it would have been cool for Batwoman to appear in part 3, I do think part 2 did a relatively great job in introducing us to the character, and especially the world, or the surrounding area, I guess, of Gotham City. All the Batman references, all the references to all of the Batman villains and characters, all of that were pretty awesome to watch in Elseworlds in that second part. Then Superman appearing. This is the one thing out of all these concepts that was very disappointing in this crossover. When he was revealed to be in the crossover, I was ecstatic. I was so excited because I loved that character in the first 2 episodes of Supergirl Season 2, but now in Elseworlds, in the first part he was great, but in the third part he was incredibly disappointing. I go over why in a previous video where I say things I would change about Elseworlds, but Superman in general, out of all these things that they crammed into this crossover, Superman suffered the most. As for the Elseworlds, they made a change here. It isn't really what it is in the comics. In the comics, it's other universes that are very different from our main universes, while here in the show, the Elseworlds is the Monitor bringing the Book of Destiny to certain universes and using it or giving it to a host. They use it to create alternate realities, which is the test that the Monitor calls Elseworlds, or rather the 90s Flash called it Elseworlds, and I did like that change because in the comics, I never really understood the difference between the multiverse and the Elseworlds, so this was a very creative change to this concept. As for the Monitor, he was great in this crossover. The character was great. The actor was great. In general, a great version of this character. What he brings to the multiverse is so significant, and even though he's here really just to set up Crisis on Infinite Earths and his brother, the Anti-Monitor, he is still a really great character that I really hope to see later on in not only this season of the Arrowverse, but obviously in the next crossover. And then the last concept to go over in this video before I get into the rest of the review was probably the best part of this crossover, and it was really only in the first 2 episodes, and that is the body swap. I said this before, but specifically in the Arrowverse, between the characters of Barry and Oliver, the concept of this body swap where Oliver is put into Barry's life, Barry is put into Oliver's life, and nobody knows outside of those two, and also everybody else in the multiverse outside of this universe, I thought that was a genius concept. And again, this is specific to Oliver and Barry. You can't really do the same body swap with other characters and their dynamics, but for Oliver and Barry, it worked incredibly well. So not only was it a genius concept, it was also executed incredibly well. It led to hilarious moments in part 1 and 2. Again, this is very missing from part 3, which is a big reason why I think part 3 is significantly worse than part 1 and 2. It wasn't as funny because the body swap wasn't there. The dynamic between Oliver and Barry wasn't as strong because the body swap concept wasn't applied. But in the first part and the second part, this was definitely present. The hilarious moments were hilarious, and the dynamic between Oliver and Barry was incredible to watch. Not only that, but the dynamic between Oliver and Barry as well as Kara just really elevated this entire crossover. And this is especially in the second part. I think the second part did this incredibly well. It was just so fun watching these three characters interact with themselves, with other characters around them. So that was definitely a huge part why this crossover is so good. It's a big reason why this crossover might be the best crossover yet. Some other things I love about this crossover that really make it feel very significant is, one, Justice League felt like it really formed in this crossover, and I said this before, so I won't really go into detail, but in short, I never really felt like the Justice League was present in any of the crossovers, or the Arrowverse in general, nearly as much as the fight scene between Superman, Green Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl versus Amazo, and I won't go into the reason why here. If you want to know why, there will be a link in the top right corner of the video where I really discuss it in detail. But then there's something like the Green Lantern reference, which is not only a reference to John Stewart, aka the Green Lantern, but also a confirmation that John Diggle is Green Lantern or John Stewart from another universe, or another universe version of him, which is a very famous fan theory for a very long time. Then there's also the fact that this crossover is leading up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, which in my opinion felt like the Arrowverse from maybe not day one, but really the first episode of The Flash. All of that was leading up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, and they're finally doing it next year. All of this, like I said, makes the crossover feel, and everything I included, everything really that happened in the crossover, minus a couple things, just make it feel like an incredibly significant crossover. Now, they may be just because this is set up for not only a Batwoman TV show, but also possibly a Superman TV show, and obviously Crisis on Infinite Earths, but that doesn't really matter. I do think that this crossover can 100% stand on its own. Obviously, there are some loose ends that will be tied up in exactly 1 year from now, and nothing is really resolved in the end. Like, the fate of the multiverse is still at risk, but I do think if you just ignore that whole thing, I do think this crossover can stand on its own. It feels very significant, and that's something I love about Elseworlds. But now we move on to things I didn't really like, which you probably know, but it's all derived in part 3, except for one thing that is kind of minor. Actually, make that two things. Both of those things are in part 2. I do think part 1 is practically perfect, but in part 2, there were a couple of Felicity Smoke scenes that I really didn't like. She was talking to people for no apparent reason, and in the end, she talked to Oliver and reconciled. I hate the fact that they used the crossover as a platform for that, but then there's also the 90s Flash, who, based off the marketing, I thought he would get so much more play than he got, which was definitely disappointing, but everything else is from part 3, and I think the reason for that is because, one, part 3 is just doesn't have the body swap thing, and everything leading up to part 3, I thought they would resolve it much better. Some characters they used wrong, like John Deegan and Superman, some things that didn't make any sense, like Barry and Kara flying or running around the Earth, which would stop time for some reason and kill them for some reason, and they did it for no reason. They basically committed pointless suicide for absolutely no reason. Actually, suicide that makes no sense for no reason, so I didn't like that a lot. So like I said, Superman, he was very wrongly used. He was used as a prop to make Supergirl look better. If you want to really go to watch a video that really goes in deep about why this is such a bad thing for the character, watch John Campea's video, link will be in the description down below, to what the CW, or why the CW hates Superman so much, and how you can see that in not only this crossover, but also the season finale of Supergirl Season 2. I don't think this is a problem at all in the first 2 episodes of Supergirl Season 2, which is why I loved him so much in those episodes, and really in the first part of this crossover, but in part 3 here, it's just ridiculous. Then there was John Deegan, who, this isn't actually specific to Part 3. This is actually something I disliked in the entire crossover in all 3 parts, because this is the main villain of the crossover. This is Dr. Destiny in the comics, and number one, he didn't really become Dr. Destiny until the end. I'm guessing he will have some role in Crisis, and maybe he then becomes Dr. Destiny, but I do think in general this was a waste of John Deegan. Not only did he get no motivation or development, because all the motivation was told to us in an opening monologue of Part 3 instead of 1 shown to us, into applying it to the actual character whatsoever, and as well as the fact that he turned into Superman, which is fine and all, but you already have 2 other Kryptonians there, just varying the powers by giving us Dr. Destiny, the real Dr. Destiny, the one that looks like a skull and has the powers that I really can't go over right here, because I don't really know 100% what they are off my head, but I do think there's something related to dreams. At least that's what I knew from Justice League Unlimited, so that would have been something cool to see. In general, Dr. John Deegan was a very, very disappointing character, and also something else in Part 3 are all the Alex scenes. Those were ridiculously stupid. All that being said, while Part 3 was significantly worse than Part 1 and 2, if you look at my Top 25 Arrowverse Moments of the Week video from that week, which was Top 25 because it was a crossover instead of Top 10 for any given week, the top 2 moments, which were spoiler alert, Crisis on Infinite Earths Tease, as well as Oliver talking to the Monitor, which is the best moment in the crossover, were both from Part 3, so even the worst episode out of the 3 had some incredible moments, and that includes the 2 best moments from the crossover. So in general, this was an incredible crossover. It had some disappointing things in it, some things I didn't like, but for the most part, I was really, really entertained. I really loved basically every moment of it. It was awesome seeing these characters together. The dynamics were awesome. The references were great. The characters introduced, for the most part, like Batwoman and the Monitor, were great. Lois Lane and John Deegan, not as good, but Batwoman and the Monitor were incredible additions to the Arrowverse, so this is an incredible crossover event. So I will give Elseworlds a 9 out of 10. So now to answer the big question of this video, is this the best crossover event so far? Before the crossover actually came out, I said that this will be by far the best crossover so far, and I was certain about that, and that's just because everything that was in the crossover looked so damn good. Now that the crossover is out, and there were some of those things that were pretty disappointing, I'm not 100% certain that I would say that this is the best crossover so far. In general, I think that this crossover is much more significant, much more entertaining, and much more world building or universe building than the rest of the crossovers, but there weren't really as many disappointing things in any of the other crossovers as Elseworlds. Maybe that's just because my standards or my expectations were so damn high. In the end, I'm not 100% certain, but for the purpose of this video and answering the question, I will say yes, Elseworlds is the best crossover so far. However, I don't think it will hold that title for very long. So anyway, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. Did you love this crossover? Did you have some things that disappointed you? Or did you, for some reason, hate it? Let me know all your thoughts, and if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.